Social deduction games are fascinating. Competing with others, using deductive reasoning to catch other players in a lie, it's thrilling, and playing on the opposite side, stringing together lies, getting away with a false narrative, throwing others under the bus, it feels great. Elements of social deduction games have made it into other video games, but with the obvious exceptions of actual social deduction games, there are very few non multiplayer games that invoke the spirit and mind games of a real game of werewolf or mafia. Gnosia, or I think that's how you pronounce it anyways, is a game that turned some heads when it came out in Japan. Released in 2019, it got some rave reviews, praising the way that it used visual novel elements and the mechanics of a social deduction game to make for a unique experience. Unfortunately, it was a game released in 2019 on the Vita, making it incredibly unlikely it would receive a localization, which of course it didn't. But then, a surprise announcement and release of a Switch port reinvigorated hopes for a localization. And now in 2021, thanks to publisher Playism, Gnosia is now available in English, and oh boy, it's an incredibly ambitious game that's really unlike anything I've played before. You wake up on a ship with no memories of who or where you are. A person named Setsu gives you the rundown on the situation. At the last stop, the spaceship you're on has been infested with an alien entity known as a Gnosia. They look like humans, they act like humans, but they're on the hunt for humans, and if any manage to make it to the ship's destination, the repercussions for mankind would be disastrous. The ship's AI prioritizes the destruction of the Gnosia over the survival of the crew, but they've managed to reach a compromise. Every day, the crew will discuss and try and figure out who the Gnosia is, and place them into cold sleep in hopes of eliminating them before it's too late. Thus, the game's on to find out who's the alien, but it actually resolves itself quite quickly and the Gnosia is eliminated. Or not, depending on how you do it, but either way, you then wake up and find that the ship has been infested yet again. See, you and Setsu are stuck in a time loop. The people present, the roles they have, and who among them is a Gnosia changes, but two things are constant. There's always the threat of Gnosia, and whether you win or lose, you'll wake up in another loop. So the game is less about the mystery of who in the crew is Gnosia, and more about the overarching mysteries. Who are your fellow crewmates? What exactly are the Gnosia? And more importantly, why are you stuck in this loop, and how can you break it? Now, it'd be pretty hard for me to get through this without at least mentioning another werewolf-inspired social deduction game that you might have heard of. Raging Loop. That said, the comparisons pretty much start and end with its inspirations. While Raging Loop uses the game of werewolf as the backbone for an otherwise pretty standard visual novel, or, standard being a relative term because what even was Raging Loop by the end of it, Gnosia goes a step further. You won't be reading hours of text with a few choices that have binary results. It is a social deduction game. You are expected to play. You can lose. And if you want to see the story to the end, you'll have to win at least a couple times. A loop generally goes like this. It starts with a discussion where you sling your doubts and defend those who you think are innocent. After 5 rounds of this, it comes time for the vote, where you choose who's going to go into cold sleep. The majority rules, and a second vote occurs in the event of a tie. After that is the night phase, where you can choose a location and visit other characters, which can let you see certain events, learn more about the characters, gauge what they think about you, and most importantly, help you find out who you can trust. Then the Gnosia make their move, choosing one crew member to eliminate from the game. This process continues until either all the Gnosia are eliminated, or until the Gnosia presence outnumbers the crew. Making things more complex are the role assignments, which are dished out at random at the start of the game. Crew members don't have anything special about them, and are pretty much entirely reactionary to what goes on around them. The engineer can investigate one person per night in order to see if they're human or Gnosia. The doctor investigates those who were placed into cold sleep, determining if they were human or not. The guardian angel can choose one person a night to protect, preventing a death if the Gnosia were targeting them. Finally, for the human side, there's the guard duty. 2 people who stayed on the ship who can verify the other's identity and are guaranteed to not be Gnosia. The Gnosia can lie about being engineers and doctors, and they also have AC followers on their side, humans who side with the Gnosia. Neither party knows the other, but the AC followers can lie about their role to cause confusion and potentially aid the Gnosia. Finally, there's the bug, an anomaly that will destroy the universe if left unchecked. They play on neither side, and win so long as they're still in play at the time of the game's conclusion, regardless of if it's a human or Gnosia victory. They can't be eliminated by Gnosia, but in addition to the normal cold sleep method, they can be eliminated if they're inspected by the engineer, though they too can lie about having this role. You only have one vote per day, so even if you can suss out who's lying, you need to convince everyone else to vote alongside you. This is where the stats and skills come in. Every time you complete a loop, you gain experience, and with each level up, you can increase a stat by 1 point. Each stat will change how your actions in the debate play out, but more importantly, reaching certain thresholds lets you use new skills that can shift the tide of the conversation in your favor. Skills are unlocked randomly depending on what events you see, so the game encourages different character builds to play to the strengths of your available skills. But while you might think the debates become as simple as tossing all your powerful skills back to back, that's not true at all. The early game gives you a safety net to ease you in, but it doesn't take long for the game to strip it away. You don't have any protagonist immunity. You're just as much on the chopping block as all the others. If everyone else thinks you're suspicious, they can very easily send you into cold sleep, and if the Gnosia deem you a threat, you can just as easily be eliminated come nighttime. Again, this is a social deduction game, so winning isn't about using your best skills, but being conscious about how you're presenting yourself and knowing when you can get away with using them. Talk too much and it looks like you're trying to divert attention away from yourself. Talk too little and it looks like you have something to hide. Become an unlikable crewmate and the Gnosia will have no problem taking you out. And while announcing your role at the very beginning is good for getting brownie points among the crew, if it goes uncontested, and heck, sometimes even when it is, you'll be painting a large target on your back, and unless you have the utmost faith in the Guardian Angel, you're better off waiting to reveal your role until asked or when a fake tries to claim it. A similar level of thought needs to be put into playing as a Gnosia. There is no honor among liars, and if you're acting out of line, they'll have no problem tossing you under the bus to save their own skin. Obviously, engaging in the conversation a normal amount is a good start, and if one of your Gnosia buddies is getting dogpiled, don't waste your breath trying to save them, as it'll only make you look suspicious too. When it comes to faking roles, you need to be smart as well. If you're in a team, if another Gnosia claims a role, don't claim the same one, as between the real, the fake, and a potential AC follower, it'll make you look suspicious for no reason. Likewise, if there's two engineers and neither are Gnosia, you might be tempted to eliminate one or both of them just to save the trouble, but it's actually more useful to keep them alive for a bit. Not only because the Guardian Angel will probably cover one of them, but also because you can use their reports to figure out who's the real engineer and who's an AC follower, and then act accordingly. And while eliminating your detractors overnight might seem like a good idea, if the people who are vocally opposing you are suddenly disappearing, that's not going to be a good look for you either. Of course, I say all that, but at the end of the day, this is still a single-player video game. It's not a true replacement for actual social deduction games. It's pretty easy to get into a groove that works. As long as you only lead the conversation once, maybe twice a day, you should get through most debates just fine, and that's not the only thing you can get a read on. While the characters present and their roles are randomized each loop, their personalities and the way they behave aren't, so you can use that knowledge to figure out who you should target and who you should ignore. Comet, for example, is really good at finding liars, but she's awful at lying herself. Shigemichi goes hard into any role he plays, which makes it easy to tell when he's lying about having a role. Everyone hates Raikyu, but if they manage to survive more than 2 nights, they're really good at finding liars and making definitive claims about who's human and who's not. Yuriko behaves in a similar way, but she's really good at deflecting, making it hard to vote her out, but it also makes her a popular target for Gnosia attacks. Every character has quirks like this, and their stats can be checked in the log pretty much any time, so it's not too hard to get a read on their patterns, which I can't really knock since that's kind of the point. What I can knock though is the fact that the AI makes some pretty dumb moves. If you're not 100% confirmed by another character, you can be voted out even in a scenario where you absolutely can't be a Gnosia. So last night, 2 people disappeared, which means one of them was a bug. Yup. At the beginning of the game, I claimed the role of engineer, a claim that went uncontested. That's right. Because the bug disappeared last night, that means they were eliminated by the engineer, which based on that previous uncontested claim, would be me. Makes sense to me. so I'm a human. Sus. With that said, Gnosia is a game by a team of about 4 people, and with that in mind, I'm still impressed with how many aspects of social deduction games manage to make the cut. Early in the game, before the stats and skills start really coming into play, you'll have to use some real deductive skills in order to win. And even in the late game, when you have more control over each round, the randomization of the rolls means that even if you know the characters inside and out, victory isn't a done deal, and it helps keep Gnosia interesting to play, even as the number of loops start to stretch into the triple digits. Between games, Gnosia lets you change the rules of the next loop. You can choose how many players there are, how many Gnosia are among them, what roles are present, and what role you'll have, while all the other aspects are randomized. When Gnosia is short burst, randomized social deduction fun, that's when I find it at its best. But Gnosia also wants to tell a story, and this is where I think it stumbles a bit. This isn't really a spoiler, but your end goal here is to fill up the notes section for every character, and once you do that, you can go to the true ending. Simple enough, yeah? However, while some notes can be filled by simply winning a game with another character, it's rarely that simple for most of them. Some require winning while both parties are particular roles, some require losing while in particular roles. Some happen when 2 characters happen to end up with certain roles, some require that you have a certain affinity or alliance with another character, and some happen naturally as the number of loops increases. The setup screen has an event search to help you out here, but it only sets it up in a way that events are more likely to occur. It doesn't actually guarantee them, and even if the conditions for a note are present, fulfilling them is another issue. Some notes have a crewmate or Gnosia icon to dictate what role you need to be, but that's about the only hint you're gonna get, and while some have more obvious tells for when they're available, they can be hard to accomplish in their own right, especially those that require keeping a certain character alive, because it turns out that babysitting a character who never learns how to shut their trap isn't really that easy. On one hand, I like the idea of character events being dished out randomly. It means that everyone will experience the game differently, and even on the second playthrough, you won't be able to play the game the same way, and I'm always a sucker for that kind of stuff. On the other hand, it means that over time, events will become harder to come by, and that hurts the game's pacing by the endgame. Early on, the randomization isn't an issue because there are so many events that you're likely to stumble on them just by accident. But as you make it to the end, the occurrence of new events starts to dry up, and it's not too uncommon to go loops at a time without any new events. My advice is to try and focus on one character at a time and get on good terms with them. Cover them, try to forge an alliance, since those are some of the aspects you can actually control. And don't take any scenes for granted, as they probably contribute to a character event. Unless it sets you assassinating Sha Ming for no reason, don't worry, they do that all the time for funsies. That knowledge will make getting to the ending a bit easier, but even if you manage to track down a guide, filling out the notes is one big process, and it can bog down the game a bit. It's not all bad though. For one, as long as you see a loop through to the end, regardless of if you win or lose, you get experience for level ups, which means that even if you don't see any new events, it's not a complete waste of time. Not that you'd be wasting much anyways, because loops in Gnosia don't take very long at all. They only take about 10, maybe 15 minutes max, and it can take even less time if you win or lose before then. So even if a loop doesn't go your way, it doesn't take long to get back into a new one. And it helps that the events that you're pursuing are actually interesting. The overall mysteries of Gnosia are intriguing, but it's the characters that I really like. Gnosia's cast is incredibly varied, and learning about their goals, their pasts, and even just little factoids about them is always a fun time, even if the process getting there can be rough. They're also very well written. Obviously I have my favorites, but there wasn't a character that left me thinking, oh god, I gotta put up with them now. I feel like part of that can be attributed to the game's localization, which is pretty solid. There are a few errors that slip through the cracks, as is the nature of a text-based project of this scale, but Playism has been diligent about ironing out as many errors as possible through patches, and that's really cool. I've played my fair share of visual novels from much bigger publishers that have big errors that have just been kind of left out to dry, so the fact that Playism, a comparatively smaller publisher, has been transparent about taking community feedback and using it to touch up and make Gnosia's localization the best it can be, it's an effort I respect, and I hope we can see more of that effort from more publishers in the future. My first playthrough of Gnosia took me about 15 hours and about 170 loops, though I've seen people manage to shave that time down by quite a bit. It's a well-sized game, but beyond just that, it's incredibly replayable as well. I mentioned how character events are shuffled, but the way that skills are unlocked means you'll have to adjust your builds on multiple playthroughs to play to your strengths, and there's just a whole bunch of scenes to see. My first playthrough, I never got the scene that unlocks the last skill. There are a whole bunch of scenes like losing to certain Gnosia, or playing in such a way that the game's AI just kind of breaks down and cries. At the very start, there are entire scenes that you just won't see if you vote the way the game wants you to, and that's crazy to me. Even on that first initial playthrough, Gnosia is engaging and rewarding enough to justify that length. For a bit of perspective, right after the game came out, I had work to do on another video, and I managed to get my hands on a PlayStation 5, and I still played Gnosia for 4 days straight. Yeah, not even a new console was able to tear me away from it, and that might say more about me than it does about the game, but I think that means it's done something right. Gnosia is $25, and I think it's absolutely worth it. I can trace the DNA that makes up the elements of Gnosia to other places, and yeah, some of those elements are done better elsewhere. But Gnosia brings it all together in a way where it's wholly unique. I can't think of a game quite like Gnosia, and even if it's a bit too ambitious in some areas, it's a creative and unique experience that I think is absolutely worth your time and attention. And while I don't know what developer Petit Depoto has been working on since Gnosia's release, if they keep up this level of ambition and creativity, I'd say whatever it ends up being will be in pretty good hands.